Well, we couldn't say we didn't see this one coming. One is definitely a giant influence on the other, and both have definitely proven themselves to be giants of the progressive rock scene. So I'm glad to see that this dynamic duo has finally teamed up to give us some amazing new music.
No one would ever bless the moonlight for me. Too late, too late, too late.
The Invention of Knowledge by Anderson Stolt. So Anderson Stolt is the dynamic duo of John Anderson from Yes and Roland Stolt from the Flower Kings. What I love about this album is that overall atmosphere. Because the Flower Kings and Roland Stolt's music really emulates and presents the same kind of flavor and texture of music that Yes and John Anderson brought, the unity of these two really jives well with one another. That same kind of optimistic and kind of celebration of music is found within this, and that's kind of my favorite part about this album. I find with today's music and a lot of today's progressive rock music, it's very depressing and it's very pessimistic, or it's just very dark in tone. I always kind of thought that the positive emotions will always trump kind of the negative side. So I feel like that's kind of been lost in the shuffle with a lot of bands nowadays. A lot of the bands now are much more depressing, a lot more aggressive, a lot more just heavier in tone. So it's good to see that we've got some light and fresh air in here. And that's another really good way to put this album. It's a really good breath of fresh air. Even though a lot of the tones and a lot of the things that we've heard aren't really necessarily new. The sounds on Invention of Knowledge really kind of harkens back to that later 70s that Yes was bringing about. It's kind of like the Tornadoes. Even with John Anderson's solo projects of Oasis of Sun Hollow or the follow-up of Song of Seven, it has that same kind of approach, but it does incorporate a lot of that same style of playing that Roland Stolt offers. So those that aren't familiar, John Anderson provides the lead vocals on this, and he is the main driving force in terms of the vocals. Roland Stolt doesn't really offer any vocals on this album. Roland Stolt is mainly the guitarist found on this album. When you picture these two names, the music that you're getting is pretty much exactly what you would have pictured. Pleasant as well. That's definitely Roland Stolt's flavor of music. He does take a lot of influence from Steve Howe, which was the guitarist from Yes, and John Anderson's vocals on this album are just beautiful. He sounds better than he has in quite a long time. Listening to him on this album was definitely a great feel for me because it sounds just like within the 70s. He hasn't changed in his vocals at all. If anything, he's definitely matured, but it hasn't really affected his vocals, so he knows his limits and he knows how to play within it. And that was felt very, very well on this album. And I also love how this album is structured. It's structured very much like those classic albums from yesteryear, where it's divided into 4 different suites, but divided amongst itself. So we have the first one, which is the Invention of Knowledge, which encompasses the first 3 songs. And for me, this is the real highlight of the album. This is where it really knocks it out of the park, with the first track being Invention, and it's that last piece within the Invention where everything's coming together. And that's what I really like about John Anderson and his orchestration of sound, and how everything comes together near the end. That was just a beautiful, beautiful track. And how it goes really into We Are the Truth, the second song. Again, it goes right into the third song of Knowledge. And those 3 tracks, Invention, We Are the Truth, and Knowledge, those 3 are really the diamonds of this album. And it's unfortunate that it hit so hard at the beginning of the album that the boys really didn't know where to go from there. I mean, the rest of the album is superb. It is fantastic, but it never really reaches that same height that those 3 songs had.
Surrender to it all, to it all. We are true, made in heaven, we are glorious.
We're coming into the second movement of Knowing and Chase and Harmony. These 2 songs are, again, very, very great. And it almost feels like those first 3 songs were more of like an Anderson piece. These next 2 kind of feel more like a Stolt piece. The third suite encompasses the next 3 songs of Everybody Heals, Better by Far, and Golden Light. And it's funny, Better by Far, the shortest track on the album, sounds very much like one of the movements from Fly From Here, Yes's album that they put out in 2011, I believe it was. And it's just funny that Better by Far is almost like a wink and a nod to that track.
To run around the sky, see the dream making, see the truth spoken.
And then finally, the album closes with the final piece of No. Because the beginning of this album started off so strong, the ending, although is still a very, very good piece, it never, again, reaches that same height that the beginning did. If we're kind of looking at this critically and kind of taking it apart a little bit, which is what I really like to do, the invention of knowledge, you have that first kind of epiphany, and that's why the opening is so strong. You're like, oh my gosh, I've got this great idea, and it is so amazing, right? You're seeing it from all different facets, so it's very complex. And then you start to think about it, and you start to kind of roll it over in your mind, and so that's where, you know, you've got the invention, that big blast of information, and then you've got that like knowledge that, okay, now that it's starting to synthesize and kind of working its way into what I already know, then you kind of have that knowing, that active word of knowing. You're testing it, you're seeing where it works, where it doesn't work, you're kind of seeing that sweet spot. And then finally at the end, you have that know, kind of like a passive or a past tense where, yes, I know that, you know, I've learned this, I've tested it, and now I know it to be true. I like that dynamic. It provides more of an interesting listen going through. And that is one thing about this album, is that it is a grower album. When I first listened to it, it did really hit the feels and I really liked it, but the more I listened to it, the more I enjoyed it. I know if I put this onto the shelf a little bit and then revisit it later on, it's going to be a much fresher listen, because that's kind of what this music is like. The more you listen to it, the more you appreciate it, and then when you put it away for a while and listen to something else and then come back to it, it's that much better because it has aged, and I know that this album will age well as well. So overall, I highly recommend this. If you're a Flower Kings fan, if you're a Yes fan, if you're a Roland Stolt fan, if you're a John Anderson fan, definitely check this album out, because it is going to be just a fantastic listen and a fantastic time. I have to say, you've got to pick this up now. If you can find it on a physical copy, definitely do so, because this one is one that could fit very, very nicely in any Flower Kings or John Anderson collection. And that's about it. So what did you guys think of the invention of knowledge? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever it was, let me know by commenting below. Thank you guys so much for watching. You guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.
Give it up to Rama, give it up to sea, give it up